David Jenkins had a really tough time recently. He got an anonymous email saying his wife Lauren, whom he's been married to for 6 years, was spotted entering a motel with another man. This shocked David because they were deeply in love, having regular intense moments together. Despite feeling tense, he went home and found Lauren acting carefree. She mentioned a work trip, but David suspected something fishy. To check, he pretended to have a work trip on Friday, but actually planned to spy in the motel. Lauren seemed unfazed, even suggesting they still spend the weekend together. David agreed, trying not to make her suspicious. As the evening unfolded, he noticed odd things, like Lauren taking an impromptu shower and acting strangely quiet. Despite these doubts, they discussed weekend plans and went to bed. David, once confident in his happiness, now felt wrecked with doubts about his marriage. If Lauren did anything romantic with another man tonight, David's stomach would twist into knots. He thought about Wednesdays and realized that based on his memories, about half the time there were patterns in their relationship. Tying it to her post-work shower, he felt in the dark about her deceit. Lauren got into bed first, hugged him tightly and playfully suggested distracting him from work for 30 minutes. David, trying to stick to his plan, said he couldn't because of work stress. Lauren accepted it, kissed him, and wished him good night. David felt relieved but questioned what she meant by, "if you're up for it." The next morning, David left for work before Lauren woke up to avoid further questions. He felt he was handling the situation poorly, reminiscent of Poe's Telltale Heart. David decided to work late, leaving a voicemail for Lauren, and spent the day organizing things, calling lawyers, and buying a voice-activated pen for surveillance. He brought work home to pretend to prepare for the trip. When he returned home, Lauren seemed unruffled, and Friday morning was a repeat of the previous night. David, still anxious, rose early, checked the pen, and left for a cafe before meeting with a lawyer at 10 a.m. They discussed the anonymous email, David's concerns, and his plan to investigate. The lawyer explained the typical divorce process without children, and David left the office bewildered. How could this nightmare be real? David, who thought they would be together forever, spent lunchtime in a cafe researching divorce procedures online. He delved into websites about detecting cheating spouses, hiding affairs, and reasons for infidelity. Not finding any insight into Lauren's motivation, he secretly hoped it was a mistake, that she couldn't betray their deep love. Unable to bear the uncertainty, David left for the motel mentioned in the email. As he circled the parking lot, he realized Lauren might not always use the same motel. Despite placing a pen in her purse for surveillance, he couldn't endure the uncertainty about his marriage. Entering the motel parking lot at 1:40 p.m., he found a remote spot to observe the rooms and waited. Not many people were around, but when a man parked a late-model Acura and entered a room, David felt a vague familiarity. About 5 minutes later, Lauren's Honda Accord parked next to the Acura. She approached the same room, knocked, and entered with ease. David's doubts ceased, and the truth hit him. Pounding his fists on the steering wheel, he couldn't fathom why Lauren would do this. It was a senseless and unreasonable crisis, leaving David feeling blindsided and sharing the crumbling fate of a marriage in terrible crisis. David felt there was nothing more to gain by lingering in the motel. Confronting them by pounding on the door seemed unpleasant and could escalate, so he decided to give himself time and space to calm down and plan his next steps. Then he remembered the pen in Lauren's purse, grimacing at the bitter realization of real-time sound. Taking a few photos of the cars parked side by side and a close-up of the man's car, including the license plate, David slowly drove away without a specific destination. Aimlessly driving, he narrowly avoided an accident, prompting him to stop at a brewery for a beer to gather his thoughts. Initially, he believed he had shifted from suspicion to full awareness, but he realized how little he knew about the situation. Unsure of the man's identity, the duration of the affair, and the reasons behind it, David had evidence to confront Lauren, but not enough to know if her response would be truthful. Despite the temptation to listen to the recording of the daytime rendezvous, he knew he had to wait before retrieving the pen from her purse. Additionally, he realized that rejecting intimacy with Lauren during his assumed business trip had raised suspicions, and he needed a plan. David decided he needed the pen, confirm its contents quickly, and then leave the house for a few days to assess the situation. A cunning thought struck him, calling Lauren with news that he was almost home to shake her and her lover up. After finishing his beer, he dialed Lauren's number and left a voicemail, pretending to be on his way home earlier than expected. Upon arriving home, David packed a couple of bags, wrote a note to Lauren, and left the option to escape without a major confrontation. Wanting to shock her as much as she had shocked him, he called her, not knowing that Lauren and her lover, Rob, were in the midst of their second encounter of the day, viewing it as a celebration or victory dance. "I need to go, Rob." It was David, she said. "He's already on his way back and will be home around 6:00 p.m. as usual." "Well, at least you got the early warning phone call he promised you," Rob joked in response. Lauren hugged him, said goodbye, and quickly ran to the bathroom to take her usual shower. Routine and habits took over as Rob dressed and left the room, heading to the gym for his standard workout. On the way home, Lauren was more concerned about David's early return and his joyful mood about the project turning for the better. He made good time in Friday traffic, she murmured aloud as she parked her Accord next to his new Civic. Lauren thought he might want to be intimate tonight after missing most of the week. Still a bit nervous, she turned the corner, approached her home, and saw David's car already parked in the driveway. Hearing Lauren's car on the driveway, David was on pins and needles. This would be the first time he would see her since confirming she was cheating. Bags packed and in the car, the note prepared, all he needed was the recording pen. He sat in the living room, ready to confront Lauren as soon as she arrived. "Hi, honey," Lauren exclaimed, entering and seeing David rising from his chair. "Looks like everything went well. Why don't we go somewhere to eat and celebrate?" she suggested as they embraced and kissed each other. "That sounds great, especially since I got home earlier. Why don't we go upstairs and change, and I'll order a table somewhere?" David suggested. Lauren readily agreed and headed upstairs to the master bedroom. David waited until he heard the shower start, then approached her purse and retrieved the pen. He pressed rewind and then play, hearing the beginning of the lovers' conversation before quickly turning off the pen. "Well, that settles it. Time to get out of here," David said, pulling out his note for Lauren and leaving it on the table next to her bags. Standing in the doorway, he looked back at their home sadly, realizing things between him and her would never be the same. Lauren, finding the note, gasped, "No, God, no, this can't be." As she read David's words about knowing about her affair, she felt a mixture of sadness and anger. David had left the house and driven to a hotel, settling into his room. He had dinner downstairs, ordered a double scotch on the rocks, and reluctantly returned to the room to listen to the recording of Lauren's betrayal of their marital vows. Sitting in the chair at the writing desk, he turned on the recorder and heard the next sounds as soon as Lauren entered the room. "Lauren, huh, Rob? I can't believe we've already finished this, both in meetings and in time. I didn't think we'd breeze through at least 5 meetings within 30 days. We spent much more time planning and preparing than executing. I suppose that's the result of good planning, isn't it? I guess I have to say I'm glad it's over. The stress of hiding our affair is getting to me, and I understand why long-term affairs usually end in a catastrophic outcome." "Yeah, same here. I know my wife has no idea, but I see how this could easily stop over time. You said David won't be in town until late tonight, right? I thought we couldn't celebrate today by having a drink together to mark our success and finish, so to speak, on a high note." "That was quite unconvincing, Rob. I'm kind of in, but rules are rules, so we won't do anything new that wasn't on the list." Lauren and Rob parted ways, and David heard the kisses and tender sounds emanating from Lauren. David listened to the entire 90-minute illicit merger between Lauren and Rob. 2 things struck him. Firstly, everything seemed normal, even ordinary, and David couldn't fathom why Lauren would risk her marriage for the same. David knew the affair was real. They had met 5 times, but he still had no inkling of the why behind it. Friday night was mostly sleepless for both David and Lauren. Eventually, David gave in, realizing there was nothing more to extract from the recording. Deciding to make use of the weekend and work-free freedom, he messaged Lauren, "I'll come to your place at 11:00 a.m. to talk, if that's okay with you." Lauren grabbed her phone upon hearing the incoming message ping. "Yes, please come home. I'm so sorry I've caused you pain." David ignored Lauren's response. Arriving shortly before 11:00 a.m., David trudged to the front door and rang the doorbell. "David, you don't need to ring the doorbell at your own house. I just felt awkward walking in," David replied. "Shall we sit at the kitchen table and discuss the next steps?" Lauren was displeased with David's businesslike behavior and how this discussion was unfolding. Seated at the table facing each other, time momentarily stood still, and then David cleared his throat and asked a question that shook Lauren to the core. "Do you deny in any meaningful way the facts of what I've learned about your involvement with Rob?" Tears welled up in Lauren's eyes as she contemplated David's question and how focused and businesslike he was. In her view, This conversation was supposed to make David understand that nothing she did changed her feelings for him, and that her affair with Rob was just to prove their colleagues wrong. David only knew about the senseless love and nothing about Lauren's work conversations that led to Rob and Lauren's plan to prove their colleagues wrong. David, before we go any further, you must first understand that Rob and I did this only to prove that we could have an affair and no one would find out. A few months ago, many of us at work were discussing affairs and how they almost always get discovered, as well as the tragic consequences they cause in marriages. The discussion split into two camps. Some thought any affairs beyond a one-night stand would inevitably be exposed. Others believed that keeping something more significant than a one-night stand secret would require some planning and, of course, a fair amount of deception. But it could be done. Rob and I ended up in the latter camp, and then we talked about the precautions that would be necessary. Wait a second, are you saying this was just an experiment or game? Just to see if you could have an affair that would go unnoticed? Yes, essentially that's it. The discussions about it turned into a game. The hypotheses we laid out over a few lunches just took on a life of their own, and eventually, we detailed everything quite thoroughly. We were confident we could pull it off, but therein lay the hitch. To truly succeed, it meant that not a soul could or would ever find out about what we achieved. In short, we decided to test our plan, fully aware that Rob loved his wife as much as I love you, and that this game, if you will, meant nothing in terms of our relationship. We don't love each other, we love our spouses. We deliberately did nothing wrong. I used to have a faithful wife, and now I don't. Yes, I guess now that you know, that's true. But if you had never found out, you would believe that I was faithful in my heart. It was meaningless love throughout this month. If you wanted me after Rob and I were together, I never refused you. All right, Lauren, careless seconds, no harm done. I feel all warm and fuzzy now. Listen, I know you're in pain, and you must feel terrible hearing what you did. I genuinely regret causing you pain, but I hope the details I've shared can dispel any doubts about my love for you and erase any thoughts about my feelings for Rob. No love, no feelings. It's just because you know it's a terrible thing. Now, Rob and I were very careful, and we were sure that we would never be discovered, and we never thought it would harm our marriages. Okay, so that's a long story to essentially admit that you betrayed me for a month, slept with a man who isn't your husband about 5 times, and fully intended to keep this affair a secret from me, your husband, until the end of our lives together. Going back to my initial question, I assume you're not denying any of the disgusting facts about what I've learned about your activities with Rob. Lauren slumped a bit under the renewed direct assault on her justifications. Yes, I suppose the facts are as they are, but the reasons behind them must matter. There was no passion between us. We just needed to prove that we could conceal an affair. It was meaningless for both of us. David grappled between the thought that Lauren might have swallowed a bottle of foolish pills last month and the question of whether she always adhered to such absurd beliefs. I truly believe that part of your story. It doesn't seem like there was much passion between the two of you. Exactly, David. There was no passion. I know it hurts you, but I'm willing to do anything to atone for my guilt. Hold on, this is still nonsense. All this justification of it was just an affair is nonsense, and you must know that very well. We talked about being faithful when we decided to be exclusive. We discussed it in detail when talking about marriage. We exclusively dated for almost a year, and we talked again before I proposed. We specifically promised each other fidelity during premarital counseling and in our wedding vows. I don't recall a single mention of the escape clause. It was just an affair. Lauren saw that arguing with their history was pointless. David, you're right. We did discuss fidelity in detail. The point I'm trying to convey is that we are on the same page where it matters, considering our love for each other. I've loved only you for the past 7+ years, and never felt the slightest inclination towards Rob. If playing Yahtzee with Rob 5 times a month could matter, we would have done that instead. It seemed more like the foolish pills were to blame for everything. And then David latched onto what Lauren had just said. So why didn't you just play Yahtzee or do something else? Anything other than just an affair? You made it clear that engaging in this with Rob wasn't necessary. You also said that not a single soul would ever find out about this affair, so you could have done something else in that hotel room. And it would have looked and smelled like an affair, mission accomplished, right? To prove that you can have an affair, you didn't actually need to make love. You still needed to hide your activities from our spouses, so there was still a share of guilt in that. You still left work early, so you would still have to conceal it. Lauren's head tilted to the side as she contemplated David's challenge, and she felt herself quickly sinking deeper. Lauren couldn't come up with any other justifications to overcome his assumption. Since no one would ever know whether they did it or not, it actually didn't matter to win their little unspoken bet. They just needed to play out the affair with all the necessary secrets and hotel rendezvous. So why did she actually make love? I don't know, David. I never thought about that aspect of secrecy. We planned a secret affair to see if we could do it. Then we decided to test our plan. It was just assumed that we would go all the way to the end. Lauren, all day today, we used the word just to minimize what you did, like saying just a second or just a little, when in fact, what you did inflicts serious damage. And it's the worst thing either of us could have done to our marriage. The fact that you don't see this yourself is possibly worse than you sleeping with another man 5 times a month. To you, it's almost like you slept with him only 5 times, so it's not a big deal. Well, it's very important to me, and at the moment, we haven't moved anywhere, so I'm leaving for now. David left, returning to the hotel. On Monday, he canceled work and began contemplating Lauren's arguments. He couldn't believe that she thought so little of her fidelity, brushing it aside to win a phantom bet against coworkers who knew nothing. Enough of this, thought David to himself. I could sit here, torture myself, and try to find some explanation for her actions, but there isn't one. It wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal of her commitments to him. Her precious vows to keep those commitments to him forever until death do us part. What ultimately surprised David the most was that, as terrible as his final decision was, he felt surprisingly at ease with it. He felt better than ever since receiving that email. Without losing hope, Lauren willingly agreed to another meeting the next day. "What's this?" asked Lauren, quickly scanning the stack of papers. "It's just divorce," replied David.